It is time to look at Disneyland's Tomorrowland. On this show, we have some amazing concepts, some that look backwards, some that look forwards. So many cool ideas of ways that could possibly improve Tomorrowland. It's really just a fun exercise. Plus all those things, I'm going to say a few ideas too that probably won't be as interesting as yours. Regardless, it's going to be super fun. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 133 of the Tomorrow Society Podcast. It's Dan Heaton, and this episode is going to be a bit different than the typical interview shows. You're mostly just going to be hearing from me, with a few exceptions, with my thoughts on Tomorrowland, but I did reach out and many of you have submitted your own ideas. I did something similar last summer. In that case, it was much broader in terms of the topic. I went through Epcot, the park, and talked about all my various ideas, some fairly realistic and down to earth, others not so much. And what I realized with that was this is a really broad topic. But this time I decided to zone in on a specific land and in a specific park. Because you could say, let's just update Tomorrowland, but they're all so different. Even Florida versus California is very different. And there are things we should update in Florida, I think. However, Disneyland with their Tomorrowland, there's a lot of potential. And I want to give a disclaimer up front. I am not doing this show to say I know better than anyone who has studied this, does this every day. This is an exercise that is for fun. What it's really doing is spotlighting what all of us love about theme parks. So really, this becomes almost partially Armchair Imagineering, but also just to celebrate what's cool about theme parks while doing it under the guise of we're going to try and take a land that we've loved in the past, we love parts of now, and think about what are ways that we could even enjoy it more? What are some areas that have kind of not been given as much attention that deserve more attention? And really just what are some fun off-the-wall ideas? These are the kinds of things that if you were hanging out with your fellow theme park fans in a world where we would go to bars and do that, where you just say, what about this? Wouldn't this be a crazy attraction? Or I like this, but didn't you used to love that? So I'd like to think of it that way, where we are sitting down and just enjoying the fact that we get to talk about what we'd like to see at Disneyland, which I know is going to reopen at some point. Obviously, I want to get out there and put that into practice. I want to live a little bit of my history with Disneyland. I have not been there as many times as Florida because when I was younger, we of course could make the car trip from St. Louis down to Florida. It was very easy to do, relatively speaking. It was a long drive, but not super expensive to do that. And Disney was always expensive, but wasn't at the level now, so we would go about once a year. We went a few times to California. The first time I went was in 1985. So I do have memories of what Tomorrowland was like with the PeopleMover and Adventures Through Inner Space and Circle Vision and some of the other elements that are no longer there. And that trip kind of set the foundation for how I look at Disneyland's Tomorrowland. I know it was not the first edition. It had even changes since, of course, the 67 edition, but it was before Star Tours. That's kind of the baseline for me. And then, of course, I've gone more recently and seen what it's like. But I know some of you go there as often as I've been to Disney World and have a lot more thoughts. So I wouldn't say I'm as much of an expert, but I still feel like I have a pretty good gauge of what I like in a Tomorrowland and what I think Disneyland could do given that space and make some adjustments that are there. And like I mentioned, there are going to be a few special guests that if you have listened to the podcast for a while, you will be familiar with that come on and give their ideas. They were nice enough to record some audio, and I'll be responding to some of those during the podcast. Well, I have been going on for long enough without getting to the point, so let us do this. Let's talk about cool ways to improve Tomorrowland at Disneyland. We are going to start with the low-hanging fruit here. Remove Astro Orbiter. Disneyland has issues with crowds, especially you need to have the open pathways. You basically are going into Tomorrowland and then you have this spinner sitting on the ground right in front of where everyone wants to go. People come down Main Street, they turn right. One of the biggest benefits of the Astro Orbiter at the Magic Kingdom is that it's up high. And when you put it on the ground, it just turns into kind of being like, I guess we'll do that. Okay. Now, do we still need it? I'm going to say yes. I know you have other spinners. You have Dumbo. Of course, at Disneyland, you do not have, thankfully, Aladdin's Magic Carpets. So it's not a case where you go over there and you have another one that's very similar. I think it needs to go back on top of the platform. We are going to find another way to get up there that does not involve the elevator. And I know it's kind of cool. It's almost like you're astronauts going up to the Apollo capsule and you're taking the elevator, but it really slows things down. There has to be improvements with how this ride functions. I think the best move may just be some sort of moving walkway. I think we're going to get clever here and find a way, unlike in Florida, where you don't just put in some type of slow moving, getting everyone into the elevator, getting everyone up there, getting everyone back. It slows everything down. One other thing, too, I want to talk about the style, because if you think about where Astro Orbiter will go, which is on the platform right in the middle there, kind of facing the two big structures, which is what's currently Star Wars Launch Bay. And then further back, of course, you have Space Mountain. So as part of retheming, I want this to match closer to how those buildings are going to look. It's not going to be exactly like the Star Jets, but it's going to be a sleeker. It's not going to pop as much in a weird way, but I want it to fit within that land. You know, how you might think a spacecraft would look. That's one thing where I like the Jules Verne look. I think it can be very cool, but you've got to go all in. You got to go Disneyland Paris, Discoveryland if you're going to do that. For the most part, what I'm trying to do is kind of do updates, but not start over. I'm looking for ways to improve it. That's something that can be done in maybe 6-9 months, a year. You know, I'm sure there are some designers laughing right now, but you get the idea. Something that's not like, okay, this is going to be closed for 4 years or something. So during this show, at the end, I'm going to talk about some of the more involved ideas that people have, play some clips, but I'm also going to reference some that people have similar things because, like I was saying, a lot of these early low-hanging fruit ideas are very common. And I will say this came from JP Marcotte in an email, just very simple. One of the ideas was, goodbye Astro Orbiter, it goes to the scrap heap. Oh, JP, come on. That's a little rough. To the scrap heap. I mean, lots of people have had fun on this. It just should not be in front of the land. So that's the simplest way I can look at it. Don't put it in front of the land. So second big thing is the PeopleMover. The easiest approach would be to just say, bring it back. Have it be similar to how it was, problem solved. And I don't think that's a terrible idea. Iconic attraction, there for a long time until, of course, the unfortunate rocket rods. Now, I know that the PeopleMover, from everything I have heard, the track has been damaged. Thanks to rocket rods, to maybe time and years. But I'm going to assume that there is a way to reinforce or even possibly replace this track where it can work. I'm not saying to bring back the exact original vehicles that were there before. I don't even want the Magic Kingdom vehicles. I want something that is later technology. We don't want it to just look like your typical public transportation. You want to have Disney touches. You know, work with a company to come up with, okay, if we're doing a PeopleMover, find ways to make this the latest, coolest thing where the PeopleMover itself is an attraction. That's kind of the first step. Second step is, of course, we need this to make Tomorrowland feel like a world on the move. You say, well, Dan, you just moved the Astro Orbiter. That kind of makes it feel like that. No, we need the whole land to feel that way. They used to be that way where you had the PeopleMover and the Skyway. I am not bringing back the Skyway because I do feel like I'm trying to pick and choose with what I'm going to do here. So I'm bringing in a PeopleMover, but a new modern one. And also, here's the second thing, we're expanding the track. I want the PeopleMover to cover more of the land. Right now, it does a good job covering most of it, but then we have kind of that area. I know you have the monorail over there. Speaking of kinetics, we still do have that, but you have the area over by the submarines, by Autopia, by the Matterhorn, which the Matterhorn, whether or not that's not really Tomorrowland, but I know it kind of is on that edge there. It's really in Fantasyland. We're going to expand the track to go above that area. So you're kind of doing a bigger loop where instead of right now being more focused on the areas by Astro Orbiter, Buzz Lightyear, Launch Bay, Space Mountain, you're also going further over there. Second thing is, I know there's an area inside where Disneyland for a while had speed rooms and Tron. We are doing something with that. Speed rooms need to be a part of Disney. I know there's still a speed room at Buzz Lightyear. That is not enough. We are finding a way to bring in speed rooms. And in a sense, I'm okay if we use old footage that gets upgraded to the latest version, or I'd love to see some new footage, futuristic footage, actually maybe even real footage of flying in space, if that's possible. Probably not possible, but in a sense, let's make this futuristic, but let's use kind of an old style approach. You know, I love speed rooms. The effect still works. You just need to make, I don't know if flying through the Everglades is going to excite people as much, but it probably still will. People still love soaring. But in a sense, though, when we are not talking about something futuristic, real footage, no CGI, no soaring around the world. We need real footage if we're going to be flying through things that actually exist in our world. Real footage. If we want to look way to the future, kind of a la Dream Flight and kind of that futuristic thing, or even the Tron type of images, okay, we can create those, but try to make it realistic. Don't try to make it look like you're not even trying. So that's the second part there. This is one of the biggest projects I think that's necessary. If you're going to say, which one do you think is most important to helping the land? This might be up there for me, because I feel like one of the things that's really hurting Tomorrowland, the biggest difference to me between, obviously it's Carousel Progress, but another big difference, probably even more than Carousel Progress, is the fact that Tomorrowland at Disney World has the PeopleMover. Right now it's closed, but in general, it has the PeopleMover. So you need that going all over the land, becoming a key part where people want to ride this. And I know there has to be a way to do it. You can come and say, well, Dan, we've heard that everything's so beat up. It would just be so massive. It wouldn't even be worth it. No, the benefit outweighs the costs here. This isn't going to cost as much as Galaxy's Edge or something. And the benefit to this land is immense. So we need this. I also wanted to reference, a few people brought this up. Nick B, who is Geodesic Nick on Twitter, at the end of his message wrote, and bring back the PeopleMover, of course. Author Paul Lane, who wrote a very cool book. Revive PeopleMover track with updated version. Of course, then we have JP Marcotte again, who says perhaps knock down PeopleMover. Unlikely, though. I think he recognizes people don't love that idea, but also says that it's unlikely. And I go, yeah, JP, I was with you on Astro Orbiter. I don't love the idea of losing that. Now, granted, what are we replacing it with? That's sort of the other big option there, is what is going instead. If you do that, to me, I feel like something like that, it was one of my favorite things as a kid. And also, too, I think elements like the PeopleMover and the monorail and everything could inspire, pandemic notwithstanding, more interest in public transportation, in different forms of transportation at Disney World and Disneyland, but beyond. And I would love to see that happen. And having the PeopleMover at Disneyland and Tomorrowland is going to initiate some interest, especially in younger people who would like something like that. And then you have everything else going around. You have the PeopleMover, then you have the railroad, you have Autopia, you have the submarines. You've got so much happening. The land would just be hopping, and I am here for it. I want to see this happen. One more in the low-hanging fruit section here. And I know I'm not really going through the land like as you walk, but I'm kind of hitting the most basic things. And that's Autopia, which I will mention too, that Paul Lane also mentioned, eliminate Autopia. It may be an original attraction, but its time has come. That is something that I think many people would share as a choice. But for me, I kind of like it. But Dan Meyer also said something that I'm going to kind of get at. Electric cars for the Autopia Speedway. That's Dan M. Meyer on Twitter. This is pretty easy. This is something that plenty of people talked about in Florida and in California. And again, JP Marcotte, change Autopia cars to electric, get Tesla as a sponsor. Suddenly it's futuristic, prints money. So, we have some different thoughts. I think a lot of people recognize Autopia needs to be addressed. But my thought is, I still think there is a value. Yes, it takes up a ton of real estate, but I don't think that's a terrible thing. And like I mentioned, with putting the PeopleMover around above it and having the Monorail above it, having a lot going on, I think there is something to be said of being on the Autopia and driving all around and then having all these other things going on, possibly the train too. But I think it needs some updates. Most basic sense, the sets, everything around it needs to fit within Tomorrowland. This is a Tomorrowland attraction. No more Indy Speedway kind of approach. And this could cover it for Florida too. We need to do lots of sets, make it look futuristic, make it look fun and kind of weird and cool, like Horizons level future or something. Second, the cars. Now, I know part of the allure of the cars may be the sound. It's very loud. Some people don't like it. I don't always like it myself. And just, but we do need to find a way to, whether it's just making them straight up electric cars, finding some sort of alternate technology, just make it something different in that vein. So we do need to make it seem like something from the future, not something from the 1950s or, even the 80s even now. But in general, let's change the vibe. If you change the sets, if you add futuristic music, if you change the cars, make them electric or another kind of different approach, it's okay then. If everything fits, it becomes an entirely different experience. Heck, I think it would be fun to add some sort of big tunnel or interior experience where there's some animatronics that relate to the future. If you want to get there, that would be something really cool. When you get as far as you can away kind of from the entrance, let's cover it up a little bit because you still want to be outside, but let's try something completely off the wall, not create a story. I'm not saying we need to create a story here, but make it into like you are in the future. You're in a different world. This is how cars are. You're driving around. You're experiencing different things. You're seeing lots of futuristic sets. To me, this is a no-brainer. And to me, I know the vehicles would be fairly pricey, but this is not something that would just be an insane cost. I think there's a way to do it where if you use your money wisely, you could really set up something where you are creating something very cool. Now, Tesla, the other one from Dan Meyer was partner with Elon Musk. And I know that's been considered kind of an idea you hear a lot relating to Epcot and also relating to Autopia here. I'm going to say no. For this particular case, this has nothing to do with some of the output. Teslas are really cool cars. They're doing great things with SpaceX, but I don't think Disney needs to really focus too much on Elon Musk. He's a problematic individual. And granted, you could easily say, well, yeah, but there's a lot of problematic CEOs and leaders and all of that. And that could totally be true. I mean, that's when you're partnering with Tesla, even SpaceX, if there's probably a way to do it where as long as Elon Musk is not like center stage, if you're thinking of it more in terms of the companies and what they offer, then I think Tesla and even within Tomorrowland to SpaceX would be really good. Again, he's such the face of those companies, and I am not sure that that is the best choice for Disney. I'm not going to go off on kind of a tangent here. I want to kind of stay focused with the task at hand, but I will say that, there haven't always been great things connected to Elon Musk. I like the idea overall that if Disney is going to try to get a sponsor here for this new Autopia, that whether it's Tesla or something else that is doing futuristic or even just forward-thinking vehicles would be a great sponsor here. So I like that idea. I'm not trying to poo-poo it. And I do think if it was Tesla, I wouldn't be like, I will never go on this or something like that. But in general, I think the Autopia still has potential for me. I understand when to remove it, and there are some amazing ideas that will likely be awesome that would involve that. It's more, if we keep it, I would think that a good way to do it was to make it futuristic. I'm over here as Captain Obvious, basically, but I do think that there's something to be said for making it that way. Okay, next up, I'm going to play my first message from a listener, and this is someone who's been on the podcast before, Dustin Engels, who's the author of the book Around the Worlds in 80 Days. Really cool book that Dustin wrote where he goes to all the Disney parks around the world and talks about it. He was on episode 90. It was super fun. That was in December of 2019. Dustin has some similar ideas to what I was going to say, but an extra portion that I haven't really addressed, which I think is super cool and want to talk about. So here it is. Here is Dustin Engels.
Hey Dan, it's Dustin Engels, just sending over my thoughts on ways to improve Disneyland's Tomorrowland. I'll start by mentioning one that I have to imagine you're going to hear from some other people as well, and that is to bring back the PeopleMover. So obviously, as with many Disney park fans, I have a ton of affection for the PeopleMover. I think it's just super important for the parks to kind of have these sort of non-headliner, mid-tier C&D ticket attractions that kind of provide an opportunity to take a bit of a breather in the middle of what's always a very busy day. And I think we started to lose a bit of that in the parks, and I miss it. Plus, I just think having those cars kind of zipping around above Tomorrowland brings a lot of great, fun, kinetic energy to the land, which I'd argue is an important part of the Tomorrowland aesthetic. But even from a more practical perspective, and possibly my biggest reason, is that the infrastructure of the PeopleMover is such an integral part of Tomorrowland's design, particularly in California. You know, the track is literally the spine of that land. So when you're walking through, there's just no way to ignore it. So having such a prominent design feature kind of sit there unused makes the land feel incomplete, and that's unfortunate. So I'd bring it back. I'd say my other big thing would be to rip out the Magic Eye Theater, which I think is now called like the Tomorrowland Theater or something. But that's the theater right out in front of Space Mountain. So Space Mountain is such kind of like an iconic visual in Tomorrowland, really in all of the Tomorrowlands around the world, except for Shanghai, which swaps it out for Tron. But I've always found it kind of strange that the Disneyland Space Mountain is so kind of tucked away and hidden. And a big part of that is that the theater really obstructs the sight lines over there. So if you look up old pictures kind of shortly after Space Mountain opened in the late 70s up until when the Magic Eye Theater opened in the mid 80s, you'll see it originally had this space stage up front. And the photos of that era are really so much cooler than how it looks now. And so I'd say just rip it out, and I wouldn't even propose replacing it with anything. You know, I would maybe just, add some seating, some green space, because, as with most of Disneyland, you can always use a little more space there. So I think it frees up some space, gets rid of a theater that's been underutilized for years anyway, and I think it would just improve the Tomorrowland experience. So anyway, I can't wait to hear what kind of other fun, imaginative ideas for attractions and stuff that you and the other listeners come up with. So thanks, Dan.
So this is really interesting to me because I thought about it, and I'm going to talk in a minute about my ideas for what to put in that theater, but I didn't consider the fact that why don't we just demolish it, because there is a challenge to have a situation where everything's so crammed in there and it doesn't create an inviting experience. It creates an experience with just like a bunch of blocky buildings, and that's not futuristic. So I like what Dustin is getting at there in terms of simplifying it a bit and making sure that something like Space Mountain can shine and really stand out. I do kind of like the idea of Space Mountain kind of being a little bit hidden, but I understand that there is something to be said for just making it where it really, the architecture is so cool of Space Mountain, so why not have it stand out? So Dustin, I think you are onto something there. And on a similar note, I wanted to mention a note from Nick Esposito, who sent me an email. He says, I'm just going to go with the low-hanging fruit, more greenery. Since the first time I ever went in the early 70s, and probably ever since the place opened, that thing that always struck me was, and he says this in all caps, concrete. Acres and acres of wall-to-wall concrete. Admittedly, that sort of thing may have seemed futuristic in the 50s. Pre-stressed concrete wasn't widely used until around the 60s. But come on already. Look at that place. Let's soften the area up. Planters, trees, maybe a living wall or two, and even hanging gardens. Pretend that nature has a place in the world of tomorrow. Nick, That's awesome. It's interesting to mention that too, because, well, one, Dustin also mentioned that in terms of maybe replace it with the green space, which I think is a cool idea, but also in terms of what Disney is doing at Epcot in Future World. Now, granted, I think they may scale back a bit how much they were going to do there because of COVID. It seems like that's the case. But I think the general idea with removing the legal legacy tombstones and adding in kind of this really cool old school fountain and eventually making that a more inviting space was the idea that Future World has greenery and is more natural, along with like Moana Journey of Water and some of the other ideas they're going to do there. Disney is starting to think that way, at least in terms of Epcot and Future World, which again, people saw a lot of concrete, a lot of big looming structures, kind of like the World's Fairs from New York or the Montreal Expo and everything else. So you look at this and you say, that is good, especially in Disneyland. I feel like we could use more green spaces. And while part of me goes, yeah, but we're not going to remove anything. We need all the attractions we can have. We need the capacity. However, if you make places so much more inviting and comfortable, like Disneyland already is, but make Tomorrowland that way, you may have a situation where people find a lot to do, especially locals that don't run attraction, that, when the new annual pass holder program comes out, that hopefully is still good to the locals, that they're able to come in and enjoy it. And maybe that does take some of the pressure off some of the attractions. So I think it's a really cool idea. And it fits well with what Dustin was kind of getting at, which is remove the visual intrusions, make it a more inviting space, somewhere we want to hang out. And I know he also mentioned the PeopleMover. I think I covered that pretty well, but I will say, Dustin, you are correct. Smart person. That's all I will say there on Dustin's thing. But I want to talk a little more about the theater now. So this won't be a surprise if you listen to my Improving Epcot episodes. I really like the idea of using these theaters in multiple ways. Now, it's easy to say, well, multiple ways, Dan. Disney's already done that when they put in their previews of various upcoming movies. That's not really what I have in mind. I'm not opposed to that ever happening, but I would want those to be more important presentations, more like special events and really limited engagements, and really something that people would be super excited about, not just 5-10 minute teaser or something to just sell it on the marketing side. If you're going to do that, Disney, I want to see, 30-minute documentaries about the making of a new movie that really go into the background, show us things we didn't expect, give scenes from the movie, but are beyond that. So I like the idea of making the Magic Eye Theater or Tomorrowland Theater a rotating space for various things. Now, we want to keep the 3D technology because I love the idea. This is a thing that I think is so important at Disneyland. We've seen it a little bit with them bringing back Soarin' over California right before it closed for the pandemic. They do a lot with limited engagement events and characters, but not as much with things like theaters like this. So my thought is, why not use this and say, okay, we're going to have Honey, I Shrunk the Audience play here for a month. Then we're going to switch it up. We're going to have Magic Journeys play here for a while. But also you could show various films from the past. Maybe one night you show an obscure Disney movie. I'm talking about something that relates to Tomorrowland but isn't readily available. Or, you have some of the space episodes from the Disneyland TV series, and then you bring in someone to talk about it that's an expert on that. There are so many different things you could do. Use this as an event space, but also as a way to feature both attractions from the past and possibly some new things. And maybe in a sense, like, okay, so we have a movie that is real. You do a special night where you show not just an old movie, but you show something more recent and you have the director and actors come. Find different ways to use this space. And I know it would likely take some technical upgrades because you need to be able to show different things. It's a little different than when you have just one 3D attraction showing for years. But I feel like this is something that could really be special and work. And I want to see Disney do this and make that theater into, if you're going to keep it, if you're not going to remove it, don't just have it be a place where we show 5 or 10 minutes or short little sneak peeks of movies. Make it into somewhere special that really takes advantage of the fact that it's in Disneyland. There's all these people here. You have a captive audience. And maybe it's something where you can do, I hate to say it, hard ticket events at the theater. that's good from a business perspective too. There's a lot of different ways you can go with it. So a big part of what many of us look at when we think about Tomorrowland is IP. Right now you have Nemo, Buzz Lightyear, and Star Wars through Star Tours and sometimes in the past through Hyperspace Mountain. So you already have kind of an odd mix. And I'm going to talk a lot about my ideas for that and some of your ideas. I'm going to start with this message from Courtney Guth, who's from the Book of the Mouse Club podcast, along with Emily McDermott. They both do such a good job in covering lots of books related to Disney and films and the parks. They also have had a lot of interviews with authors that I've really enjoyed. They were on episode 72 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I was also on their show. We talked about Treasure Island, which was really fun. Courtney, I think, right away mentions IP, but then also talks about an interesting approach that I want to dig into to maybe fix some of those issues right off the bat. So let's listen to Courtney, and then I'll come back and talk about her ideas and then some thoughts that I have.
Hi, Dan. It's Courtney from Book of the Mouse Club. I love this idea of brainstorming ways to plus or enhance Tomorrowland, and this is especially close to my heart because I did my Disney college program at Walt Disney World Space Mountain. Though my home is on the East Coast, I've been fortunate to visit Disneyland, and I think one of the challenges of Disneyland's Tomorrowland is the mix of IP. There's Pixar representation from Toy Story and Finding Nemo, a Star Wars experience disconnected from the park's Galaxy's Edge, and of course the classic Tomorrowland attractions like Space Mountain and Autopia that are their own independent stories. There's also the challenge of a land of tomorrow rapidly catching up to today. I've visited Disneyland Paris, and I think the Discoveryland concept is an easy solution to the latter. I love the steampunk and Jules Verne-inspired theme design that has futuristic qualities but also doesn't lock itself into any specific time period. A uniform look for the land would be a great first step to adding some needed cohesion. One of the strongest elements of Tomorrowland, in my opinion, is the kinetic energy, and I would love to see that enhanced further with the use of the defunct PeopleMover or Rocket Rod's track that is still clearly visible throughout the land. Perhaps a slow-moving ride with narration that grounds us in the story of the land would serve as a way to connect the various stories. I look forward to hearing what others have to say. Thanks so much for including me.
Thanks, Courtney. I really like the idea of Discoveryland. I also went to Paris, though, back in 2006, and wish I could have spent so much more time there. Actually wasn't able to go on the Nautilus because it had closed at like 4 p.m. and we were there a little after. But I really love how their Space Mountain is set up, and of course the loop and everything else, though it was Mission 2. So much Jules Verne-inspired scenery. Tim Delaney and so many other Imagineers did such a great job with that area. It's interesting, too, because earlier I mentioned that I would move Astro Orbiter and also kind of remove some of the steampunk elements. But I do think Disney could go all in on that and make the land more unified. It would totally work. And the idea of the PeopleMover somehow being brought back. Everybody loves the PeopleMover. Disney, take notes on this. But basically, it would not exactly be the same thing, but if you're really retheming a land or changing things a lot, having this type of transportation to kind of explain it and provide an overview, I think makes a lot of sense. So I really like Courtney's idea there. And the Discoveryland idea is something that, if done well, steampunk is still a style that I think would work and wouldn't be dated super quickly, which is something that's always been a challenge with Tomorrowland in general. Is there's always that possibility that it's going to quickly not be something that connects anymore. And then we always have to be aware of that and being able to keep it fresh without constantly updating it every 5 minutes. Then that's the challenge with Tomorrowland. I think sometimes that's a little overstated, because I feel like it's a really easy explanation to say that you can't keep it updated. And I'm not saying Courtney is saying that. I'm talking more in general when people talk about Epcot's Future World or Tomorrowland, is that we can't keep it up. But one way to avoid that, like we've seen in Paris, is that you can kind of go backwards to something that's not really connected to a certain look for the future and is more looking into, Jules Verne era and further back, that can really work well for Tomorrowland. So there are a lot of good approaches with IP, and I want to talk about my ideas in a moment. But before I do that, I want to spend a little more time with your ideas. So we had Paul Lane again, who says, Debate on IP-based rides aside, it's also begging for a Wall-E-themed ride. And he's talking about that in terms of interventions. Wall-E is brought up again. JP Marcotte, revamp Star Tours to become a Wall-E attraction. Replace C-3PO and R2 with Wall-E and Eevee and print money in merch. IP might be wrong, but what does it even matter anymore? So he kind of undercuts his own argument there, but that's okay. It's very common for Wall-E to come up. I know that that's something that seems to totally fit in Tomorrowland. And if you're going to focus more on Pixar, it does fit. To me, I'm just kind of like, this is nothing against any of the ideas of using Wall-E. And I know that JP even kind of says that it's not the best to have IP there. And Paul does the same thing. It's like both of them are kind of like, well, I don't really love IP in Tomorrowland, but if it's going to be there, let's do this. But I want to talk a little bit about Wall-E in this case, because I'm not opposed to any type of Wall-E being in Tomorrowland. I just think it's a little obvious. And also, too, while a lot of us love that movie, I don't know if Disney's going to go back to a movie that's even now not as new anymore. It's tricky because I think there could be a good environmental message there, of course, and there are ways to make Wall-E fit. If you find a way to incorporate it without it being the centerpiece, like Wall-E attraction. Like, here's a good example from Brett Nachman, who from the Notably Disney podcast, he was also recently on this show where we drafted our composers, which was really fun. One of Brett's ideas is develop an ever-changing exhibition on the climate crisis. It doesn't have to be morbid, though, that showcases new technologies aimed to reduce negative human impact. I could see companies like Tesla playing a role in demonstrating their innovative products, for example, maybe an Inventions 2.0 of sorts. Even Wall-E can make a cameo. So I want to focus in a little bit on Wall-E making a cameo there. One, I do like the idea of, even though it's Tomorrowland, somehow focusing on issues with our world. And I do think climate change is one of those that's not going to go away anytime soon. This is not going to be a case where you put in an exhibition. It's like, we solved it, we're good. It's going to be an issue, as you've seen with recent weather that is very strange in Texas and other places, that climate change is really one of the big issues going forward. So if you can find a way to showcase that, but almost in a way like a Stark Expo where you're showcasing new technologies, and that's where I think Wall-E could fit. More connected to an exhibit or something like that, rather than being the centerpiece of an attraction. I think that's a really good idea from Brett. If you're not checking out his show, Notably Disney, you should be. He has a lot of great interviews. He's talked to some really cool composers like Bruce Broughton and Richard Bellis and Don Hahn and so many others involved with Disney films and the parks. But I like that idea a lot. And so, I mean, because Wall-E is one of those where you look at it and you say, well, it takes place in the future. This totally fits. But I think then that we pull back a bit and you really got to think about the approach to IP overall. And really, this comes up more for me with Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor and Stitch's Great Escape. That I know Stitch is closed, but in Walt Disney World, where you look at that and you're like, what is happening? We have Buzz Lightyear, but then we have these other two, and then we have that next to Carousel of Progress. It's all kind of weird. Here, it's not that much, but it's still, like Courtney mentioned up front, is that you have these different brands that don't totally fit completely. And to me, though, in a weird way, speaking of Star Tours and Buzz Lightyear, I think I'm okay with it. And I know this isn't the most inventive approach, but I look at it as they're in their own buildings and Star Tours first, the idea being that you are traveling to these various other worlds. So yes, you could say, well, this is the Star Wars universe. How does this fit with having that in Tomorrowland? Then, of course, you've got Galaxy's Edge. But in a sense, it's like we are in a different part of Disneyland. We are traveling through the simulators to all these other planets, including planets from the new trilogy. And so I don't mind having that in Tomorrowland. Two, I also think that it's just a great attraction and it's so much fun. And that is part of anything you're going to do. You could put the greatest theme in the world together where everything lines up. And if the attractions aren't good, it doesn't matter. So to me, I look at both of these, especially Star Tours, and I say, I love the fact that Star Tours is in Disneyland and it's right there. It's not a case, when you go to Disney World, especially before Galaxy's Edge and Toy Story Land, I didn't always even go to Hollywood Studios. I went early days and then more recently, and sometimes we would, but if we were only there for 3 days, we might not even go. So I like the idea of just how easy it is. You have you go down Main Street and here's Star Tours, and you have an attraction you can re-ride a lot. It's just in a really good position there. And with Buzz Lightyear, I think it fits okay. I mean, yes, there's probably something that fits better with Tomorrowland there, but at least in a way, I've always looked at Buzz Lightyear, especially in Disneyland, where you can actually remove the guns and use it as just you need to have fun attractions. It fits well enough with Tomorrowland that I'm okay with it being there, because every time I think, oh, we don't really need it, then I ride it a few times and have so much fun. I go, yeah, okay, it still works. So it kind of fits with my idea that it's futuristic enough. On its own, I don't have an issue with it being there. If it starts to be where you have every Pixar property and you've got, you're putting in Wall-E and Monsters, Inc. and, Nemo and everything else, and then you're kind of like, well, why is this even called Tomorrowland? But just with Buzz Lightyear mostly in there, you have this fun attraction that still works. The only thing I would do with Buzz Lightyear, and I didn't even mention what I would do with Star Tours, really I would just keep doing what they're doing. I feel like as long as Disney keeps making updates periodically to Star Tours, I don't think they need to do anything else with that. Because I know you could say, well, we could remove it now because Galaxy's Edge is there. I don't really think so. I think it serves a really important role. One, it's very popular. You need to have headlining attractions that people love. And two, I just think it's really cool the way that they've continued to update that, because that's always been the issue in the past. When you've had attractions that had screens, you say, oh, we can update anytime, and they never really did. Now they've gotten to the case where they really realize how important that is. As long as Disney continues to do that, I'm okay with Star Tours being that way. On the other side with Buzz Lightyear, I would just add some effects. I would enhance it, repaint, spruce it up a bit. I would not go the Shanghai route, where I feel like even you look at that and I'm like, this is a little duller. It's not as bright and colorful, even though you have screens and it's more up to date. So I kind of play the middle a bit. I would find a way to use some new technologies, make everything really shine, but I wouldn't really lose that much to it. Sometimes you can have old school kind of attractions, some of those old school Scooby-Doo shooter rides or the Gobbler Getaway at Holiday World. Sometimes just physical sets shooting at little targets can work better than something super high tech, even like the Justice League rides. So I think Buzz Lightyear, even more than Toy Story Mania, is more fun to me because you're traveling through something. Just spruce it up a bit. Let that be a brand that is still very strong as part of Tomorrowland, but then let's move on and make other things better and kind of have those two up front. Those are kind of, you're traveling off into the solar system in a way, or, in a galaxy far, far away in one case, but then really zone in on the rest of it and not keep bringing in other properties in terms of Pixar is what I would do there, and kind of leave it more at the front of the land. Before I step away from Star Tours, I want to read this comment, one more from Nick B, Geodesic Nick on Twitter. Now that Galaxy's Edge has brought Star Tours to the park, Star Tours could undergo a reskin. Keep the motion simulators in place as the basis for a new family-friendly mission space-style adventure on a mission to Mars or beyond. It will be easy to shoot new film to keep the attraction relevant as real space milestones progress. Perhaps add some fun throwback references to the old Rocket to the Moon attraction. Dreams of space travel are more relevant now than they have been in many years. It feels like the right time. This is an interesting idea, and like I mentioned, I'm totally okay with keeping Star Tours in the way it is. But if Disney decided to change it, having some other space adventure makes a lot of sense here. Now, I know he mentions Mission Space. Hopefully this would be something that would not make me sick, but also would be a little more exciting than the green version. I like the idea, too, of references to Rocket to the Moon and Mission to Mars, which were beloved attractions in the earlier days at Disneyland. So you could do something that way and find another connection to space travel. Because you have Space Mountain, but I do feel like we've recently just saw the Mars rover landing, which is super cool. You have TV shows like For All Mankind that are doing some really interesting things with alternate history and also increasing interest in the space program. You have movies that have done very well, like The Martian. I'm not saying they should use those properties. What I'm talking about is there is an interest in the space program. You see it every time there's a new highlight from SpaceX or with the space station or with a rover on Mars. People get really excited. Why not really lean into that? Here's another idea from Brett Nachman. He says, while I never experienced mission to Mars, it seems there's been renewed interest in recent years about visiting the red planet. Why not have him come back and feature someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson as a featured personality? Disney could even have a tie-in with their 2012 feature, John Carter, set on Mars. Oh, nice. Well, maybe not everyone would care for that, but I'd be a fan. Otherwise, Matt Damon's character from 20th Century Fox film, The Martian, could make an appearance. You know, I feel like there's a way to combine the ideas from Nick and Brett into something super cool, which is you look at it and you say, have this kind of space adventure, maybe have something, maybe Matt Damon plays his character in the pre-show. You know, I feel like John Carter is an underrated movie. I think it's a fun kind of B-movie throwback adventure. But when you hear about just rampant costs, and the reputation was so poor that it was bound to fail. But I do feel like there's some fun there. I think the lead actor is very wooden. The movie itself is treated like it's worse than it is, and it's worth taking a look if you haven't. But getting back to it, I like the idea of not redoing Mission to Mars, but of finding a way to connect to it in an interesting fashion where you're doing something new. And if you're going to get rid of Star Tours, then let's find a way to enhance the excitement and ideas of space travel. I am a big fan of the Apollo program and interest in where space can go. So I love this idea. And there's so many different ways you could do it that would be a lot of fun and really work together well. Well, let's talk about the Nemo submarines. And this is one that didn't get as much input, which is interesting to me. I mean, we did have JP Marcotte talk about closing it completely. People like looking at the ride more than riding it. You know, that's one way to look at it. But also, too, it's, to me, I appreciate what they were able to accomplish. Like Tony Baxter has talked about before, how they were able to save the submarines by putting Nemo in there. I think that was a great move. That's a case where they needed the IP in order to keep something alive. I don't know if that's really true anymore, because I feel like, yes, we had Finding Dory, but it's been a little while. And to me, I don't hate having Nemo there. I'm not a traditionalist where I think we need to have very serious kind of militaristic submarines there. I would actually like to flip this around a bit and make it futuristic. You know, I was talking about the Autopia and how to make that more futuristic. I think that's got to be the case here too. So if you could find a way to make this futuristic and include the Nemo characters, okay, that works, I guess. I don't really think they're needed. I think this could be a case where Disney really zones in on looking to the future with this attraction and makes it something more exciting. Now, the capacity is always going to be an issue. If you're not going to spend a ton of money and make completely new ride vehicles, if we want to use the same ride vehicles, you're going to have that issue. However, with a lot of the other changes I'm making, including adding in a new version of the PeopleMover, these are all attractions that are adding capacity. Using the theater better will also do that. So in a sense, what we are trying to do also with making Autopia more exciting is you are putting less pressure on this attraction to draw more people. I think here, so you'd have to drain the waterway. You could do things with the sets. You could also, I would love the idea of connecting this to the original Horizons at Epcot Center. And what I mean by that is creating an underwater city under here that you go by and having those vehicles that are working on kelp, seaweed, lots of things you could do there where it's not just nostalgia because you're using the submarines in the area that you have, but you're showing possibly just in the end or throughout the attraction ways that we are using waterways differently. And I love that idea, which fits more with the forward-thinking idea of Tomorrowland. It's not looking backwards. Instead, it's looking ahead. So that's really the main thing I would do with that is, I'm going to say remove Nemo and Friends, but if we really need the IP, maybe there's some way to have them make some appearances and still talk about the future. My big focus, though, is let's use this as a way to, again, really do Tomorrowland, because if you go far enough, this isn't something that's going to be out of date, because some of it is like essentially what if kind of concept, not really something that would be lost so quickly. It's more looking forward in kind of a cool, different way. We're now going to switch gears and actually flip backwards. And this connects to my next listener message, which is from Carly Wiesel, who's been on the podcast several times. She has her show, Very Amusing, which is a really fun and cool podcast. She's also a theme park journalist, writes a lot. If you are on social media, Instagram, Twitter, you're probably very familiar with her. Carly has an idea that I love, and I'm going to turn it over to her to tell you all about it.
Hi, Dan. This is Carly Wiesel calling in with way too many thoughts about what they should do to Tomorrowland at Disneyland. Now, I whittled them down to one big idea that if I worked at the company, I would pitch them on and likely immediately be canned. But either way, I want them to repurpose the old Carousel of Progress building that has just been sent out to pasture. Like, they don't even do anything with it anymore, really, and repurpose it into an attraction that takes you through Disneyland's past. I'm figuring you can maybe do something on both levels of that building with an OmniMover. I mean, space restrictions do not count because this is my dreams. But if you actually have to think about, like space and weight and things like that, just knock out Autopia and utilize a test track system and have it go through the building and then out and around afterwards. So there's a fast part at the end. Essentially, I would want all of the indoor scenes to be a way to relive all of the rides from early Disneyland, the things that people like us dream about and wish we could experience firsthand. You'll go from one room themed to House of the Future to another room themed to Rocket to the Moon. Basically, it'll be an adventure through inner space. And personally, it's the one thing I would rope drop. Please make that happen. Okay, thank you.
This actually surprised me in a really cool way, because I think of Carly as someone who's so on top of what's happening now with openings and everything. And she goes back and just starts naming all these amazing past attractions, which I haven't really talked about so far, like Adventures Through Inner Space and Rocket to the Moon and so much more. I love this idea, especially because I feel like that Star Wars launch bay interventions area fits really well with being a place to celebrate the past. And when I say that, I don't just mean drop in a bunch of attractions. That's what I like about it, because Carly is coming up with a new attraction that pays homage and connects to these older attractions, but isn't just bring it back. Because that's always, to me, this is no offense to anyone who wants to bring back anything. I just talked about bringing back the PeopleMover. But the idea of just saying, bring back Horizons, bring back Carousel of Progress, whatever, insert whatever you want there, is not what I'm trying to go for. I want something that is looking to the greatness of what Disney has done, but also using it to create something new. And that's what I really like about Carly's idea. You're taking an existing space, you're making it something different, but you're also providing something. Disney has a lot of history at Disneyland and a lot of people that have been going for years and years and years and remember going on these attractions. And so for them, this is something that is important. It's not just the easy way out. That's something that sometimes bothers me when people say, oh, you just want to go back to the past and all it is nostalgia. No, there's a reason these were so cool and so much fun. It actually kind of covers what I was talking about with Buzz Lightyear and Star Tours. Innovative, imaginative, fun attractions are good. We want these things to happen. We want the theme to be fun, but we also want other parts of it to happen in the same way. And this is a perfect example of something that we want. And I like the idea and kind of zoning in on that more. The way I was looking at Interventions was also, I say Interventions like it hasn't been the launch bay for a while, but let's just say the Carousel of Progress building. I was thinking in a similar vein, but actually in terms of doing a rotating theater type attraction, given that that was Carousel of Progress and of course America Sings. My thought is that you could zoom in more on the progress idea, but again, not just going back to the family and some of the cringe-inducing moments that it has, but to also connect it to the idea of the movie Tomorrowland and Plus Ultra. And I know Tomorrowland, not that popular. Disney is not going to likely do anything there. But in a similar vein to the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, but with the futuristic focus, I feel like the Plus Ultra and Tomorrowland idea is almost better for theme parks even than movies. And I love the movie, but I'm talking in general for people. I think there is a way that you could almost have like a showcase of technology, but you don't have to use the Hugh Laurie character from Tomorrowland, but you could still be showing jetpacks and various things. You can come up with some great 60s era type songs. And then you use that for the downstairs, and then the upstairs, you do some sort of grand presentation that's reminiscent of the Progress Land at the 64 World's Fair. So it's in a sense a tribute to Tomorrowland, but also a tribute to the World's Fair, to the Carousel of Progress, to what's happened in Tomorrowland since. And you could also find a way to connect this to some of the other attractions in the area. Like I mentioned, the theater, you could also have special presentations in that theater that connect to what's happening here. Do things with I don't want to say anything related to the data pad and Galaxy's Edge, but you could have little touches throughout the land that connect to this. Do something with Space Mountain. There are so many different ways with Autopia, with the subs, that you could all connect it and have this kind of be the hub of that area, this Innovations building. That's the hub of the area. Everything else kind of springs from it. And you could really create something that's not overly complicated, not super expensive, that gives nods and touches to Tomorrowland, but also goes beyond that and finds a way to create something new. So that was my idea, but I also love Carly's idea and think that hers is actually a little more legitimate and something that might be more feasible. Something very similar, Brett Nachman said, create a 4D show experience inspired by the 2015 Brad Bird film, featuring all the cool technological ideas featured in the movie. Yeah, I get this was an overlooked movie, but it has a fan base and perfectly fits in with the land that inspired it. And if Disney could snag George Clooney to return, perhaps the narrator, then even better. Incorporating Michael Giacchino's dynamic score is an absolute must. I also like this idea. This seems like something that would fit better into the theater area since he's talking about 4D and everything. So again, he's talking about the movie Tomorrowland, and I think that it totally fits with that area because you don't have to create some massive attraction. And sure, I could say, well, how about instead of Astro Orbiter, let's put the jetpacks up there, which are in Shanghai, and that connects to Tomorrowland. But really, I think that you could find ways to incorporate the themes of that. Like we talked earlier about climate change, and again, they don't really address it directly too much in Tomorrowland, but kind of at the end, the way that everyone's kind of all that group of people that worked for Tomorrowland and Plus Ultra are looking to that, I think is super cool. There's just so many interesting ideas of what you could do. And we did just have an announcement too about Disney creating some sort of Magic Kingdoms type TV Disney Plus universe. And I know it's more about the SEA, but maybe you could find a way to make some adjustments here with Tomorrowland in Florida that actually connect to that. Mind blown, right? I love the idea, and I hope there's a way we can make it all happen. And sticking with kind of the looking back theme, Brett Nachman had another cool idea. Install a gallery/exhibition hall centered on the history of the space race in the 60s, featuring videos of celebrities who portrayed real-life heroes in films like Hidden Figures and The Right Stuff, now playing on Disney+. I assume he means The Right Stuff TV show, not the original movie. A great promo tool that concurrently honors the amazing individuals who helped Americans soar above and beyond the Earth. This one hits right down the middle for me, of course, as a big fan and person who's interested in the Apollo program and what was accomplished in the space program going to the moon. And of course, that's still in the news now, like I talked about earlier. But it's interesting that Brett then connects this to Disney Plus content, because of course that's a way to get something to happen. I recently mentioned the new announcement of kind of the Magic Kingdom universe with Ronald Moore, whose show For All Mankind is getting a lot of interest. Just started season 2 on Apple Plus. Not a Disney product, but still people are interested in this, especially as all of us kind of sit at home or, aren't doing as much as we used to. We're kind of looking more towards those tales of exploration and what happened in the past. So I think this is kind of a cool idea. You find something that connects to Tomorrowland, and the space race might be from the past, but we're still involved in it now. It's not something we've conquered that's old news. It's still totally there. So I like this idea a lot. We're going to shift gears now to talk about something that I haven't really addressed yet, which is food, which is kind of a different approach to the idea of Tomorrowland. Had a few messages on that front that I didn't expect to hear about, but I totally get why this could connect to Tomorrowland. We're going to start with Jeremiah Panhorst, who left me an audio message. Jeremiah is one of the hosts of Mouse House Weekly. He does episodes periodically there with his wife, Rachel. I was a guest recently. It was super fun. He's a big Disney fan. They go to Disneyland a lot, and I like this idea. So take it away, Jeremiah.
Hey Dan, it's Jeremiah Panhorst here. Listen, I wanted to get in on your conversation about what to do in Disneyland's Tomorrowland. Yes, that is a park, of course, that I spend a lot of time in, and I will say if there's one area in Disneyland that I feel like could use a bit of a facelift, it's definitely Tomorrowland. Now, obviously, Walt's original vision was that area to be a place to look to the future. And I definitely think that that is lacking today in the modern Tomorrowland. So I definitely would like to see them explore that a little bit more. And for me, I think one of the things that's always been lacking in Tomorrowland is the absence of somewhere really good to eat. So here's my theory, or my idea, shall we say, is what if they built a actual high-end restaurant, a go-to kind of place to get something to eat, but this one be quite different. What if it had the most modern technology inside of the restaurant? Maybe it has like robots that brings you the food. I don't know, something crazy like that. Digital menus, things like that. But to take it a step further, the culinary itself would be designed by chefs around the world that are really exploring into new types of cooking. And I know that there's a lot of great ones out there. Maybe Disney could get some of those people together. They come up with an amazing menu that has something exciting for people to eat, and would make them look at where we're going in the culinary world. So anyway, there is my suggestion. I thought that would be a lot of fun because, like I said, Disneyland's Tomorrowland area has really nothing exciting right now when it comes to food, in my opinion. And I think having an exciting restaurant there that everybody has to go to, and granted, this would be a little bit higher end, but I think it'd be totally worth it. It'd be really cool. What do you think about that idea? Thanks for your podcast, my man. Talk to you later.
I like this idea a lot, partially because, like I've talked about in the past, locals often go to Disneyland more than in Walt Disney World. And so if you can have a place that draws in, makes it more of an event, like I was talking about in terms of the theater, but does it for food, whether it's with chefs that do special tastings or just having a really good restaurant in Tomorrowland, it is going to change the way that land is set up, because right now it is very attractions based, where it's like, let's go to Space Mountain, let's go to Star Tours, let's go on Buzz Lightyear. And it isn't as much of a hangout place. And that's partially what I wanted to get at with things like the PeopleMover and some of the other updates, is to make it be more inviting and kind of fit with what I really love about especially Pandora, the World of Avatar, is that it's fun to just be there. And that's what I like to see for Tomorrowland. And of course, a great way to get a lot of people into your area to hang out is to have a really cool restaurant. And so I like the idea that Jeremiah put out there where, yes, it's not like, oh, we need to bring in the most futuristic ride. It's completely different, but the food has become a really important part of the Disney experience because they continue to bring in new restaurants. You have the rise of Instagram and just a lot of people that are looking for something way above typical burgers and hot dogs and fries. And it also provides another thing for people to do in the land, where you have people that might not be as into some of the attractions, but like to go to Disneyland and have a meal or just hang out. That's always a good thing to improve any land. So that's why I really connect with this, because I feel like that is something that's really lacking in Tomorrowland right now compared to some of the other lands and Disney parks. And this would really help to improve it. Now, where it would exactly be located, I'll have to think about that a little bit more, but I know there's some space that they could reuse, either going with Dustin's idea instead of having the theater there, though I know he wanted to remove it completely. There's a lot of spots that you could kind of retool in that way too, and I'd appreciate any of your feedback if you have a great idea of where to put this. People that are really experts on Tomorrowland, even more than me, that would be really great. And on a similar note, I have one last comment. I know it sounds like I've just been reading off everything from Brett Nachman, but one more, which relates to this, which is redesign one of the existing restaurants to center on the history and future of transportation, complete with opportunities to be seated at tables resembling old attraction vehicles like the PeopleMover and early iterations of the Monorail. There could even be videos playing around the restaurant showing Tomorrowland over the years. Featured dishes and treats could include the moon pie liner, the flying saucers of sauces, and Honey, I Shrunk the Entree. That's great. You know, also what I like about this is it kind of connects a little bit with Carly's idea too, which is that you're honoring the past, but again, I feel like you're creating something new. And this reminds me a little bit of like the sci-fi dine-in, where you're sitting in those cars, but here you're using it to connect to older attractions in Tomorrowland. Wonderful, Brett. This is such a cool idea. This is too good of an idea for it to actually happen. That's what I will say. And that is a case where maybe, again, if Disney really doesn't want to put an attraction like a ride inside the Launch Bay building, maybe this is a good place for that. Or maybe you kind of mix it up where you have the restaurant downstairs and then upstairs have some sort of other attraction or show or something like that. That's a really big space, probably way too big for this type of restaurant. But I think of it in terms of maybe there's a way to make it more of like an interactive, like part of the pavilion is something you're doing, the other half is eating. This would be a hot ticket though. Disneyland fans, we love looking back to some of these older attractions. And I also love some of the clever names that Brett came up with, like the Moon Pie Liner especially is a good one. So yeah, I think both of the ideas from Jeremiah and Brett in terms of the food are really inspired and show another way to kind of think about ways to improve a land. It's very easy for all of us to really focus on the big attraction, the e-ticket, or just upgrades to make things a little better. But something like this could also have a big effect. I'm curious to see with the Avengers campus coming to DCA with its Pym's Kitchen, how that's going to be like. Are they really going to go all out and make it something different and weird foods you've never seen? Or is it going to be more just kind of as a setup for like the decor and everything else and the names, or most of it's kind of straightforward? I'm inclined to think it might be the latter, but I have heard some things that make me interested there. So something kind of like that, but for Tomorrowland with also some of the cool decor that goes back. And I love the idea of videos of older attractions or things like that. That would be super fun too, to have that and really make it to celebrate Disney, not just look back, but to celebrate what's come and then have a new place where you can have a really cool experience. Kind of beyond my ideas in a way. I've kind of gone through, I should mention I haven't really talked about Space Mountain at all. And I don't really have a lot of big changes to Space Mountain. Like, you know, I love the onboard audio. I think having a single track and how compact it is really cool. Obviously, I would just focus there on making sure everything is in the best shape it can be. Maybe you add some new effects, make sure the ride vehicles are as smooth as they can be. They've done a lot of good things, you know, in the last, I don't know how many years, but it's much more comfortable than Walt Disney World. Audio is much better. The effects are better. I would say we can mostly leave Space Mountain beyond some cosmetic changes. Overall, I think it still works out great. Still home run, still so much fun. Nearby, I did want to mention one idea that we had from Christian Moran, who is the director of the documentary Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow, which is an amazing film on YouTube right now about Walt Disney and technology. Christian's also wrote multiple books, including one about the True Life Adventures. Here's Christian's message. What I would do is update almost everything. I talk with Google, Apple, Amazon, Tesla, all the big tech companies. I would integrate 5G connectivity throughout Tomorrowland to have augmented reality experiences and have attractions that are connected to the Internet of Things. Maybe have SpaceX sponsor the rockets, Tesla do new electric Autopia cars. void-like VR experiences where the Stargate is. And that's really what I wanted to zone in on. I mean, I think updating, I like the idea of augmented reality experiences. And of course, at a minimum, can we make the Wi-Fi work? Is that something that could happen? Not just at Tomorrowland, but in the parks. And I've already talked some about SpaceX and about Utopia, but I wanted to zone in on his last thing. Void-like VR experiences where the Stargate is. So we had a situation where the Void at Disney Springs was super cool, and I think doing something like that in Tomorrowland would be fun. Now, the trick is that it'd probably have to be an upcharge only due to the limitations of space. Because if you made it something that everyone could do, the lines would be huge. I mean, yes, there could be a reservation system, but I would think having it right in Tomorrowland. But maybe there's a way. Maybe I'm not thinking open-minded enough about this. Maybe there's a way to make it different than how their VR experiences were. And again, we're talking after the pandemic, which of course made it impossible to do anything with VR like the Void. But I like the idea of using a space like the Starcade there and making it into something with technology that, while it's been around for a while, is still not that prevalent. And you could use it more as an exhibition of that type of technology. And if you want to connect it to something like Star Wars, okay. But just in general, I think there's a lot of potential for that idea in Tomorrowland. Another way, and I think you can tell by all of Christian's comments, he really wants the technology to be updated and improved, and that fits with his interest in technology with his film. I like this idea, and I also like the idea, too, of doing it not in place of some big attraction, because I still do appreciate moving in ride vehicles through physical spaces or, actual, I don't know. I haven't totally gotten personally on the VR train, not because I don't think it's useful, just because, I don't have like an Oculus or anything else at home. So I'm not entirely clear on whether theme park guests want to go and wear VR goggles and do that, because you think about something like when they did with roller coasters and everything, and that's totally different than the Void because you're actually doing things. But I do feel like it's something that has potential, especially if done in the right way. All right, I'm now going to play an audio message from John Champion of the Roddenberry Podcast Network, who has quite a few different ideas, some that we have covered, some not, and I will play it now, and then I will come back and talk about it. Here is John Champion.
First of all, everybody who calls you will say that Disney needs to figure out a way to return the PeopleMover, and those people are right. I don't care how difficult it is, it's a good idea that's long overdue. While we're at it, that means moving the Astro Orbiter where it belongs on top of the PeopleMover hub, because, let's face it, the entrance to Tomorrowland is an ugly traffic nightmare. Now, the biggest problems with Tomorrowland right now are a lack of theming focus and unused space. Let's talk about space first. You've got an underused theater as well as the former Starcade and all that upstairs space just sitting there. The theater could actually be used as a theater with more frequently changing programs instead of just movie previews. Or you could even renovate by taking out half the seats, say, and reconfiguring into part exhibit and display space. Open up the other areas as well, even just for pass holders, legacy pass holders, to cool off or recharge a phone or connect to some stable Wi-Fi for once. Now on to the really big spaces, the former Carousel of Progress, Submarines, Autopia. If Autopia had to stay, the only way I could see that being remotely interesting is if you replace the vehicles with electric, self-driving models, something that could be programmed with a level of random, surprising experiences, thereby giving a slightly different ride each time. Maybe your car pulls over for a minute to get out of the way, or maybe you partially ride through the whole thing backwards. Regardless, we all know that the current ride is outdated. But if the whole area went away, and I say this as someone who loves at least the idea of a submarine ride, it's a prime spot to completely redevelop, maybe with a Tron roller coaster, and maybe with the addition of a restaurant you'd actually want to spend more than 20 minutes in. There's probably room for an additional C or D ticket ride back there too. Then there's Star Tours. I love it. I really do. But it needs to go after being eclipsed by Galaxy's Edge. Or if they were to move Star Tours, it truly belongs in that area at the north end of the park where it's thematically compatible. That brings us to theming. We don't have much of anything that really looks at the future the way the middle of the 20th century looked at the 21st century, full of hope and wonder. With the space currently used for Star Tours, we need something that can entertain and inspire. Maybe Wall-E is the right character to bring it to life. If so, there's an opportunity to give guests an experience that shares the wonder of science and technology and actually points to a future worth creating. Here's a bonus. I know it's not in Tomorrowland, but It's a Small World was developed for the 1964 World's Fair, so it has to be considered along with a discussion of retrofuturism, and plus I love the movie Tomorrowland. I think that ride needs to be reimagined into a ride about It's a Small World, the meta version, if you will. Use updated show techniques to put the ride into context and reassert the message of unity. You can keep the basic layout and features, but also tell the story of Walt developing it for the fair and about the intent. The movie did a great job of selling that message, but not enough people saw it.
So there's a lot to cover here, and much of what I would say with what John put in there is it's like he summarized a lot of the topics I've already talked about. And I don't mean that against John. He didn't know we were going to talk about this. It's just funny that I hear this. I'm like, oh yeah, it covered that. But it's still good because I think he sums up a lot of the challenges with Tomorrowland really well. And while I don't agree with moving Star Tours, I don't know why it doesn't bother me that much, because there are cases where I want the themes to match. I think about something like World Showcase and those pavilions. But somehow, because it's Star Wars, I'm just kind of like, well, it's okay to be over there. But I don't mean, I'm not poking any jabs here at John, because I know this is a really common feeling that now that we have Galaxy's Edge, we either need to remove or move Star Tours. So that totally makes sense to me. And the idea of Wall-E, I know, has been presented by multiple people as a possibility. But he brings up a good point about the real estate, though. Because if you think about it, there is a lot of space, as we've covered on this show, whether it's the theater, and I do like his idea about possibly making the theater smaller and using it like an exhibit space rather than having such a large theater, or like I talked about earlier, showing films there, the Starcade area, which I talked about with Christian's idea, or, even Star Tours there. Like, okay, what are we going to do with this space? Because that's the thing with Disneyland Park, space is at such a premium that it's really hard to see areas that aren't used at all or aren't used to their fullest extent, because you think about it and you think this is a very tight area. There's tons of attractions. It's not that Disneyland doesn't have enough attractions, but there's other types of attractions or exhibits or restaurants that you could do that could allow for something different. And of course, he did bring up the idea of removing Autopia and the subs, which is going to come up again in a little bit, partially at least. And then, of course, the thought of the Tron coaster, which we haven't really heard about. For me personally, now that we have it in Florida, I would much rather see something different. If we were going to remove Autopia and the subs, what is something different we can put there where we don't have Space Mountain and Tron in Florida, Space Mountain and Tron in California? Because, it's nothing against having two coasters. It's just against the idea. Plus, you have the Matterhorn right there, which is also kind of a similar track type coaster as Space Mountain. I would rather see something that's not a coaster or not a thrill ride, but is still super deeply involved. So like the idea of if we had to remove those two, I want to see a big, maybe not on the scale in terms of price, but Rise of the Resistance level scale attraction. Now, what that could be, it could relate to space in general. It could relate to, like Carly said, a bunch of different attractions in that space. It could connect to Tomorrowland, the movie, which he did reference there at the end. A lot of different things you could do there, but I think that's what Tomorrowland is really missing, is you have Buzz Lightyear, but you don't have another kind of slow moving or even medium speed attraction there that really fits that. You don't even have the Carousel of Progress. So that's something you could do there that would be another element of Tomorrowland. Last thing, I don't totally understand, I apologize, John, the small world idea. I get what you're saying about Tomorrowland, the movie, and about how it used It's a Small World, but I don't totally understand an attraction about the attraction. I know I'm just kind of throwing these questions out of the void here, but would that mean that the small world that's there now would be replaced by this attraction that's kind of more meta and looking inwardly about the creation of it? I think we'd probably have to explore that more. And of course, John, I'd love to hear your thoughts about exactly what this would be. Maybe you're talking about in a different place than like almost in addition to, but I don't think that's what you were saying. So I know that was a lot to cover and I didn't hit on every point, but I really do appreciate John's ideas because I feel like there's a lot there within just a few minutes, and it shows how many different ways you could take Tomorrowland, of course, with the PeopleMover and so many other things. Okay, I have one last message that is not an audio clip. It's from Christian Rochelle, who is a member of the Tomorrow Society through Patreon. Thanks, Christian. This is a bit of a long one, but I'm going to read the whole thing and then I will talk a little bit about it afterwards. So this is Christian's ideas. When we speak of fixing Tomorrowland, we need to be specific about what's broken. Tomorrowland, particularly the Magic Kingdoms, is a successful land. The degree to which its fans are exasperated with it is a reflection of how great it once was and how moved they were by it at one point. It's important to credit the success because being objective about what has worked leads us to what is evergreen about it. In my opinion, old Tomorrowland worked because it presented a vision of the future with solutions to the most pressing problems in the present. The shared existential dread of the heyday of Tomorrowland, let's call it the late 1950s or the early 1980s, was the Cold War. The problem that needed solving at the beginning of that period was Sputnik. To the degree that the space race of the 1960s was popular, it was so because it addressed this broadly shared fear. Disney presented an aerospace-themed vision of the future because aerospace was where the solution to the Sputnik threat lay. Consequently, Tomorrowland is popular because it presented a comprehensive vision of the future in which our shared dread had been benignly vanquished. And later, a nostalgic view of our shared victory in that challenge. I think this nostalgia, like Apollo, is one we both share. He was writing that to me. Today, Sputnik is history, and most visitors to Tomorrowland weren't alive the last time an astronaut walked on the moon. Also, there is shared dread at an existential threat that makes Sputnik and the Cold War pale by comparison. Anthropogenic climate catastrophe and biodiversity collapse. Applying the recipe that worked the first time, today's Tomorrowland would provide an immersive experience of living in a world where this threat too has been overcome. Specifically, it would show everyday life on a planet that's been restored to ecological harmony, where people live a lifestyle that's abundant and aspirational in harmony with nature. Okay, so these are his proposed elements. Architecture with green elements like living roofs and generate their own energy, a carousel of progress showing circular economic lifestyles, real-life adventures patterned on Pandora-like adventures in nature, restaurants serving plant or cell-based meats that astonish today's omnivore with their realism, a dark ride that showed how the children of Earth saved it in an imagined future narrated by Greta Thunberg and Jane Goodall. This incarnation will have a 30-year life as the world comes together to solve the crisis before 2050. Wow, that is cool. Christian, I like the ideas because, one, I think it's fascinating to think about the original Tomorrowland and how it connects to the space race. I mentioned For All Mankind recently, again, that show, where in that case, the Russians actually landed on the moon first. And it imagines an alternate history where from that, so many different things happen. You have female astronauts much earlier because the Russians did it first and the U.S. wants to respond. You have moon bases. The space race continues for a really long time. It doesn't end like it did with Apollo 17. Goes well into, at the end of the first season, in towards, the 70s, and then the very end is 1980s. So I mention that because it shows just how powerful that was. Also, it's a great show. But beyond that, it shows just how powerful it was and what Christian is getting at here. And I could go off on a tangent about my thoughts there, but I like the idea of Tomorrowland solving a problem, which is not something I think about that strongly usually. I'm always thinking of in terms of, well, this is idealistic, optimistic future. It shows what we can do with technology and work together. But the funny thing is what I just said also applies to his ideas. So he talks about a lot relating to climate change, which is, as we saw with recent weather that has just happened in Texas and beyond, is a problem that is not years down the road, that is right now. Now, finding a way in a Disney theme park to present that, especially given the current Disney leadership, could be a challenge. And I'm not saying that this leadership is so much worse or whatever. They're just very different. I think there's ways, though, you could present things like he mentions Pandora-like adventures. There are ways to present that where it's not super preachy and can be presented in a way that's entertaining, feels like a Disney attraction, but also we learn things. That's some of the attractions I love the best are ones that are able to balance that, the entertainment with a little bit of education and just a positive look at what's possible. Looking quickly at his ideas, I think the dark ride about how the children saved Earth. Speaking of like kind of a imagined future, That's so interesting. And then you have the narrators of, Jane Goodall, of course, who's been so involved with Disney conservation, and having Greta Thunberg, who is so involved now as a young voice in the climate crisis. It's really interesting. Now, I know it would never happen, but I think it's a really cool idea, and it shows kind of this out-of-the-box kind of forward thinking that I like to see with Tomorrowland. And then again, the idea of restaurants that are really showing, what's possible. He says plant or cell-based meats. We've seen improvements in that realm. Continue to do that. And of course, anytime you mention a carousel of progress, showing something new is really cool. I think this is all fascinating, Christian, and thanks so much. I hope that I did justice to your ideas because I think there's a lot there, and it's type of really cool thinking. The idea that it would have a 30-year life as we do it, like almost like inspiring something we haven't done yet, but presenting it like we already did it. It's a really fun way to look at what's happening in the world right now and maybe what we could do in the future. So now we're going to move on to the final two guests that submitted their ideas. First is Tim Grassi, who has been on this show a bunch of times. He's one of the hosts of Marty Called Podcast, has a lot of cool ideas about Epcot and about Disney and some out-of-the-box armchair Imagineering ideas that Tim always is really good at presenting. And all these ideas, it's again, every time I present someone new, they come up with things I'm like, I didn't even think of that. And it's not the same things. And that's what's really cool. So here it is. Here are a lot of ideas from Tim Grassi.
Hi everyone, Tim Grassi here from the Marty Called Podcast and www.themeparks.com. I've been a guest on the show several times, and one of my favorite exercises in theme park fandom is Armchair Imagineering, so when Dan asked me to do this, I was happy to do so. When you look at Disneyland's Tomorrowland, there are a multitude of problems, not the least of which are the Disneyland fans that will be highly critical of changing beloved attractions. Having said that, I think we need to take a heartless approach to Disneyland's Tomorrowland. The only thing I'm saving is Space Mountain. Everything else is fair game. The footprint for Tomorrowland is enormous and also wildly inefficient in areas. The entrance from Main Street USA is cramped because of the Astro Orbiter, and the area surrounding the Matterhorn has very little queue space, so guests spill out into the walkway all the time. On busy days, the queues for Buzz Lightyear and Star Tours also converge, further cramping that walkway. I really think they need to do a full gutting of the area. I would start by removing Astro Orbiter, the Matterhorn, and Autopia as we know them. I'm sure some of you would call me a heretic for removing the Matterhorn, but for me, it's an unrideable attraction at this point. I love the concept, but you feel every rivet, every weld, and every poorly banked turn on that track. I want to see it rebuilt from the ground up in a more logical place. I also hate how much real estate Autopia takes up, and it's an attraction that could theoretically weave in and around other attractions if designed from scratch. I'd like to move the Matterhorn into an area near It's a Small World on the existing Autopia footprint and potentially integrate it as part of the Autopia backdrop or as a ride scene itself. And since we're in the habit of stealing attractions from other parks, I would also consider integrating Tron Light Cycle Run from Shanghai Disneyland and Disney World in and around the Autopia track area, on the perimeter of the park, where it's a little bit better utilized. I'd also like to see futuristic vehicles that blend into the Tron aesthetic as well, and if you want to extend the canopy or even the Tron track further than the counterparts in other parks, by all means. As I said previously, I would remove the Astro Orbiter from the entrance of the land, but I recognize it's a Tomorrowland staple. There's also a large footprint that is now vacant from my picking up the Matterhorn and moving it into a more efficient area. Lastly, the Star Wars launch bay is a large amount of inefficient space, so I'd remove that as well. I would start the Autopia replacement on the footprint of the existing launch bay, but elevated above that would be a replacement to the Astro Orbiter. It could be Shanghai's equivalent or the more traditional Astro Orbiter. Either one would be fine by me. By doing this, you're utilizing the Autopia footprint as a shared footprint with the Matterhorn, Astro Orbiter, and Tron. A much better use of space. As for the vacant Matterhorn plot for the original Matterhorn, I think this is better suited for a couple of flat rides. I'd like to see the Submarine Lagoon extended with a bridge going over the water, and on the newly created vacant land, I want to see Aquatopia from Tokyo Disney Sea, and next to that, I'd like to see the Happy Ride with Baymax. Rides like the Happy Ride with Baymax are better suited for the edge of Fantasyland and Tomorrowland as kind of a blending of the two lands, while the Matterhorn would also give a new icon adjacent to the It's a Small World Plaza. So Dan did say to try to keep the budget under $3 billion, and I think I've satisfied that. You're welcome.
Okay, well, I don't think that I actually gave a budget number, but that is really funny. I'm not sure you could do all that for $3 billion, I will say, but I like the ideas here, especially the few that we haven't heard. I did mention about Tron and how I'm a little hesitant to that. I mean, sure, if Disney said they're going to do it, I wouldn't be like, ooh, I don't want to ride it. I'd still like it, but it wouldn't be the first thing I would do. So that's one thing. The Astro Orbiter moving makes total sense. But some of the things that Tim mentioned that are new, the Matterhorn moving, at first it's like, what? But it's interesting because in a way, when you walk in, you see Sleeping Beauty Castle, and then you turn to your right and you're like, the Matterhorn, that's like, it dwarfs the castle. And granted, if you don't have that, then is that a downside? However, if you put it way back in the back, and maybe you could even make it a little taller or make it a little different, the scale is different. Now, I am not someone who can do urban planning or understands how to make architecture line up right and sight lines. So there'd be some things you'd have to figure out there. But I don't hate the idea. I mean, when you take out the financial side of it, I don't hate it in terms of I do feel like it fits more with kind of the setup of Small World and how that works, because you always have a situation where really the Matterhorn, I always think of as being a Fantasyland attraction, but if it's back there by Small World, it's definitely that way, where right now it's right there on the edge there near Tomorrowland, and it totally could be talked about here, especially given that once Tim moves it, you have a bunch of land that you could totally put in things from Tomorrowland. And I do like the idea too of, everybody's focusing so much on certain things. The launch bay is so obvious. So yeah, let's get rid of that unless you're going to use it for something cool, like some of the ideas I've already talked about earlier. But if you're not going to use that, yeah, you should take it out. And the Autopia idea, weaving it out, is really cool. Aquatopia, I recently was watching a video of for a blog I'm writing about bucket list attractions, and it's a really cool trackless ride system. I feel like the water and just the whole setting is so much better. And if you could do that as kind of an extension from the submarine lagoon, it might even look even cooler. And I hadn't thought about the Baymax ride at all because, again, I kind of have spinner fatigue a little bit. But in a sense, it does fit as long as it's not like a focal point in Tomorrowland. I think it could fit there. So I don't mind that idea either. Overall, I think what's cool about Tim's idea is he's really thinking about in terms of using the space. I talked about this earlier. The way Tomorrowland kind of came together, not right away. It was not a land that started at the beginning. It was kind of things were plugged in and taken out and everything. It's not the most efficient use of space. A lot of us have talked about this so far. So Tim is thinking of it in terms of, with the budget you could use, finding a way to bring in a lot of cool attractions, but also to make everything flow together and to use the space better. And that's a thing where I think Autopia right now, like Tim says, doesn't do that because has such a huge footprint. You can't just drop an attraction in the middle of that. You'd have to change it a lot. But we're already making it more futuristic, so now is the time to do so. I think it's a great idea, Tim. I don't know what that would cost. I'm just trying to think about the Matterhorn and relocating it. Disney would tear it down and then be like, we ran out of money. And then we would never see it again. It'd be like the Yeti breaking or something. So it's interesting, but I think these are all great ideas, Tim, and I really appreciate the submission to this show. But that's not it. We received a last minute, one additional clip, and it is from another Marty Called co-host, Mr. Skipper Ben Rebstock. Ben's got more cool ideas, and again, stuff we haven't talked about that much. Take it away, Ben.
Hey Dan, Skipper Ben here, the most charismatic, funniest, and without a doubt the best looking member of the Marty Called podcast, calling him with my ideas on what we should do to Tomorrowland at Disneyland to revamp that area of the park. And I understand my co-host on Marty Called, Tim, probably called in and gave you some really boring and well thought out and proper answer to this, and I apologize because he probably bored you to death with stats and numbers and dollar figures and reasons why Walt would want to do his ideas, blah blah blah, boring. I'm gonna go for fun, and I'm gonna go all in on an IP. And yes, some might hate that idea, but I don't really care because this is my idea, my thoughts on what we should do to this area. And it's been talked about before in the past. This isn't necessarily new and original by any means, but I would go all in on the Marvel idea and add Marvel to this area of the park, namely in the old Carousel of Progress building. The thought of bringing a Stark Expo in there and merging new tech and new technology, new looks to the future, everything that you saw in the movie that kind of played off of that in Iron Man 2, and kind of what Walt always looked for Tomorrowland, like the hope and the look towards tomorrow. That's exactly what Tony Stark did, although he did it by way of also, making a lot of money by selling weapons and stuff like that. But he changed his tune after a while. He got a heart of gold, or heart of like whatever that was in the middle of his chest. But I would definitely, I think, go back in on the Marvel side of this. I think you have other things like, Star Tours. Does it still make sense to have a Star Tours there with Galaxy's Edge on the other side of the park? Obviously, they still have that at Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida, and who knows if that's going to stay long there as well. But you'd have the benefit of being able to add Marvel characters into existing attractions like you in California that you don't have in Florida. So, whether you did the Iron Man experience like they have overseas in using the Star Tours tech, I think another thing that you could look at is what are they going to do with the submarine voyage? Obviously in this COVID world we live in and post-COVID, that ride, is very expensive to run, takes up a huge chunk of land, and is not very friendly when it comes to protocols. Is this an attraction that they could see on the chopping block at some time? And if they do, that's a huge chunk of land that you could do something really spectacular with. And again, build something around Marvel. I would go, you spend a lot of money on that IP. I think you could do a lot like how Universal treats Harry Potter and have the Marvel IP in multiple parks, making people want to visit both parks to see everything. There's so many stories to tell. There's so many, even, going back to what they did at the end of Black Panther with Wakanda and the institutes that they were going to put all over the world, teaching the technology and of Wakanda. You could do that here as well, which I think definitely fits in with the theme for Tomorrowland. So while doing this also kind of gets you out of the funk that they've always been in with Tomorrowland getting dated super fast. If you build it around something like this, it might not be to the traditions of the original thoughts and ideas of Tomorrowland as Walt would have planned them out, but you also save yourself from having to figure out new ways to redo an area of the park that is supposed to look towards the future, but also gets very dated very fast. So those are my ideas. I know they're better than Tim's, way better than Tim's. You need to stop having Tim on the show because he doesn't let Josh and I hear the end of it because he's like, I'm going on with Dan again. So thank you for letting me call in and give you my thoughts and ideas, and hope to talk to you again real soon.
Oh, man, I will say that serendipity totally played a role here, where Skipper Ben submitted his ideas near the end and Tim's happened to be right in front of it. And I was like, this is great. But speaking of Ben's ideas, I think it's interesting because I did talk a lot about IP earlier, and I think I briefly mentioned the Stark Expo, but not too many of the ideas were directly. We had, WALL-E and Tomorrowland and other things, but we haven't heard that much about really putting a huge Marvel footprint there. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the Avengers campus is going to be opening soon. But like I mentioned with Star Wars, I don't mind if it's in more than one place, even in the same park or in the same resort. Now, I do like Star Tours. I don't feel like it needs to be removed. And also, at least based on videos, again, I'm going by videos. I haven't been to Hong Kong. The Iron Man experience doesn't seem that amazing. I think the best part about that is the Stark Expo and pre-show area, actually. I would rather that the launch bay area would be used for something like that if it happened. He brings up a good point about COVID and the submarines, which I haven't really been approaching this in a way like we need to look at a post-COVID world, or more likely a world where, it's going to be around for a long time, if not forever. Doesn't mean we're going to be wearing masks and not be able to be close to each other forever, but that will have an impact in the types of attractions that show up in the future. The submarines already have capacity issues. Adding in that is interesting. And then his idea, of course, like others have said, the submarines represent a really big footprint. I would not like to lose that lagoon completely. And I suspect if you were going to replace that, you would do it with something that was a large e-ticket with a big show building if you're really going to go all in for Marvel. But still, it's an interesting idea. And just in general, I have to remember too that Marvel's really big. You're seeing it right now with WandaVision, which is a very unconventional show, especially in its early episodes, being such a huge hit. And then when we look forward and we say Falcon and Winter Soldier and others that might be more straightforward will also likely do very well. I can't say they're all going to hit like this. And then when the movies start coming out, like the Spider-Man 3 that we've heard about announced for December, wow, this could really be something. And Disney's going to want to capitalize on that. Yes, they have the Avengers Campus and eventually want to have the Wakanda attraction or, the e-ticket that isn't entirely clear, but I believe has something to do with that. But it might make sense to have more at Tomorrowland. Again, part of me is like a traditionalist and goes, well, I don't really want Tomorrowland to become Marvel Land. I don't think that would happen. But I did make a case earlier for Buzz Lightyear and Star Tours being there. So if you could find a way to incorporate Marvel like they've done in Hong Kong, where they've done it pretty well with Iron Man and then with Ant-Man and the Wasp, there may be a way to do so. I could see Disney, though, starting down this path and Buzz Lightyear becomes Ant-Man and the Wasp, Star Tours becomes Iron Man, and then it's just you're recreating Hong Kong. I don't think they would do that, and really that is not the most awful solution ever if they combine that with other attractions that are also cool. It was fun to have Ben and Tim both on there. I like a pitch for their show, Marty Called, which I think there's a lot of cool Armchair Imagineering ideas. They're very candid, like the e-ticket report that Tim was on with Derek and Chris before. Very candid about their thoughts when Disney's doing things they don't appreciate and things they like. Ben, of course, was on Inside the Magic, so a lot of you already know him, but they all know Disney really well and have a lot of fun conversations. So I'd recommend that, especially if you don't mind people, that are honest about the parks and, like some things, don't like other things, and just have good conversations. So check out Marty Called, and not just because they were part of this show right now. So I am going to land this plane here. Thanks to everyone that submitted their ideas. This has been so much fun to put together. It went well beyond what I expected when I came up with the idea, especially all the audio clips. Some of the great messages, whether it's on social media, email, were all so cool. I hope you enjoyed the episode, especially if you submitted your ideas. I hope that I did them justice and gave, responded to them appropriately, I will say. A lot of amazing ideas, everyone. It's been really fun to do such a different type of show than what I would normally do. I'd love to hear what you think about it. Shoot me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Find me on all the usual social media platforms. Tomorrow SOC on Twitter. All the rest are Tomorrow Society. If you want to help support the show, I'm just going to say here, just tell a friend about it. Just spread the word, whether it's on social media, whether it's just a sibling, mom or dad, somebody that likes Disney. Just mention, hey, there's this cool show that I like, and you might like it too. I think that is the best way to keep this show moving forward and for more people to find out about it. So that's the homework. If you made it to the end of this show, just tell a friend, tell a few friends about the show. I really appreciate it. As always, this show is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I'll be talking with Chris Runco, Disney Imagineer that worked there for 40 years. We dig into his career, time working at Disneyland, and really talk about building the Rex robot for Star Tours. Chris has so many great stories. Can't wait for you to hear the show. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you again next time.